Alright fellas, Prophecy has now received its second loot refresh in its lifetime, and as promised, today we're going to be reviewing all of the new perks and weapons that have come alongside it. Today I'll be going through each of the 6 weapons one by one, talking about which encounter they come from, if they're worth farming, and what perks you should be farming on them. For those that don't know, Prophecy is a free-to-play dungeon that is found inside of the Legends tab, so each and every one of you cuties can get in on the action after you're done watching this video. As always, massive thanks to the YouTube and Patreon members for their continued support, and let's jump into this. Firstly, before talking about individual weapons, I want to discuss the brand new origin trait which can be found on each of the Prophecy guns, known as Crossing Over. This trait states that the weapon has increased range and handling for the top half of the magazine, while rounds from the bottom half of the magazine deal increased damage. Now, I did some testing specifically with the Judgment hand cannon, mainly the damage because handling and range aren't the biggest of deals in PvE, and what I found was the damage increase on the bottom half of the magazine, which is indicated via light and dark on your HUD, only gives a 2% damage increase. So the top half of your mag, which is light, is only going to give you a little bit of handling, a little bit of range, and the dark half of your magazine is only going to give you that 2%. Now, this isn't much, but the damage can add up over time, I guess, but I'd imagine that during your playtime, you probably won't notice much of a difference in gameplay. With that said, let's talk guns. Adjudicator. Starting things off, let's talk about the new 600 RPM kinetic SMG, which can be found from the Cube encounter. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much from this weapon when they first announced it would be coming back in a TWAB a few weeks ago, but after looking at the perks, I was pleasantly surprised. The first column of this weapon features Feeding Frenzy, Subsistence, and Threat Detector, with the second column featuring Frenzy, Tremors, Onslaught, Rampage, and Target Lock. I think the end-all be-all role that I personally am going to be looking for is going to be Subsistence and Onslaught, since those have such good synergy, and for those that don't know, Onslaught increases your rate of fire after a kill, so having rounds fed back into your magazine while your DPS ramps up seems kinda nice. Of course, a combination of the perks I spoke about earlier in just about any way should serve you well, although I still will say I'm not the biggest fan of Kinetic Tremors. I still view it as a pretty worthless perk most of the time, but I did want to mention it since that perk still has some fans here and there. Prosecutor. Going from a cube encounter weapon to a first encounter weapon, let's talk about the auto rifle that directly replaces the Last Breath, which was removed with this rework. Now, this is a very similar weapon to the Adjudicator, as when it was announced, I wasn't too big on the idea of it, but after seeing the perks, I'm kind of excited to farm one. Taking a look here in the first column, we have Dragonfly, which is followed by Rewind Rounds, with the second column featuring Frenzy, Tricorn, Target Lock, and Volt Shot. Now, you guys know me, I like to go for the fairly silly rolls on weapons like these because they're fairly niche and you don't really see them often. So I think the one I'll be farming will be Dragonfly and Volt Shot. Being able to cause explosive headshots with Dragonfly while arc damage also surges out to chain into enemies sounds like a blast. But of course, something like Rewind Rounds and Frenzy or Target Lock would be pretty nice too, as you can have sustained damage in in-game PvE and also take advantage of the origin trait quite a bit for some extra damage. Darkest Before. Out of all of the Prophecy weapons to get updated perks, this one is probably the most interesting, although that is mainly due to a perk buff that was issued completely separate from this loot rework. Anyways, Darkest Before is a rapid fire pulse from the final encounter, which is a gun that you'll find has really amazing synergies with its perks, but especially for the Solar subclass. Firstly, taking a look at the first column, we find ourselves with Attrition Orbs, which I can't exactly remember if I've seen this appear in the first column before, but I'd say it's pretty notable since Orb Generation got nerfed not too long ago, and this is a pretty nice addition to the weapon without sacrificing a damage perk. Alongside this, we have Heal Clip, Subsistence, and Wellspring, with the second column featuring Incandescent, Kill Clip, and One For All. Now, the main perk roll I want to go with here is Heal Clip and Incandescent, as the new Heal Clip buff has honestly been quite substantial in PvE, as you get massive amounts of health back upon reloading after a kill, and the fact that you can pair this with Incandescent is just chef's kiss. Now, I'd also imagine that Attrition Orbs and Incandescent wouldn't be too bad either if the Scorch caused by Incandescent can proc the extra Orb Generation, which I'd imagine would probably be the case considering everything else that it works with. Of course, you also have a basic role such as Subsistence and One For All, but since the opportunity has presented itself, I'd suggest going with something a little bit crazier like the Heal Clip or Attrition role that we discussed. A Sudden Death. There isn't too much to be mentioned here, so I'll make it fairly quick. A sudden death comes from the cube encounter and will notably be used in PvE because of the 1-2 punch roll that it can get. You can combine this perk with Threat Detector, Envious Assassin, or Slide Shot, or you can get a silly roll like Repulsor Brace and Destabilizing Rounds. For 9 out of 10 people though, this weapon is pretty worthless, as I'd imagine that most of you already have a 1-2 punch shotgun that you like already. Relentless. Going back to first encounter, here we have a high impact pulse rifle, which never really tends to be a common pick for me in PvE, but this weapon does come in strand flavoring and has some cool perks to go over. In the first column, we have Outlaw, Rapid Hit, as well as Slice, which allows you to apply Sever to an enemy after you use your class ability, and this will prevent them from dealing more damage to you and allies for the next 8 seconds. These perks can be paired with Desperado, Frenzy, as well as Hatchling. Out of all the weapons so far on the list, this and a Sudden Death are probably the only two that I have no interest in, but not really because they're bad per se. A Sudden Death doesn't interest me because I already have a good 1-2 punch shotgun, and this Pulse doesn't interest me because I don't care for the sluggish nature of high impacts. That said, the Pulse is pretty decent, but I don't foresee that many in-game players will really be caring much about it. Judgment. Finally, moving on to the last weapon of the dungeon, we have the reworked Judgment hand cannon, which comes from the final encounter, and thank God Bungie retained the best parts of this pick. The main changes are that it was updated to stasis and given a pretty silly yet welcome addition to the first column while retaining the OG God roll. Taking a look at the perks, we have in the first column Demolitionist, Enlightened Action, and Headstone alongside Adrenaline Junkie and Timed Payload. Of course, the original role here being Demo and Payload, which feels like it just got even better for stasis builds with the new element change. It should be absolutely nasty on builds like the Hunter Duskfield build, as well as the 𝗧𝗦𝗦𝗢𝗡 turret build on Warlock. A really cool addition here is Headstone in the first column, which might be pretty nice to pair with Time Payload, but do keep in mind that if the initial bullet doesn't kill your target, the delayed explosion will, and you might get cheated out of your headshot to proc Headstone quite often. That's why if I was personally going Headstone, I'd probably pair it with Adrenaline or maybe multi-kill clip, but as for me though, Demo Time Payload is all I need in life. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what videos you'd like to see from me in the future, and I'll see you guys next time.